Week one of P. Diddy's criminal trial is in the books. Compelling opening statements, surveillance footage of a savage beating, photos of alleged injuries, and disturbing accounts of alleged sexual exploitation, abuse, and humiliation. A lot for the jury to think about. But after week one, who's winning? Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Well, it has certainly been quite the week in the Sean Diddy Combs trial. Actually, it was the first week. It was week one in a trial where he's facing racketeering, sex trafficking, prostitution charges, a trial that could end possibly in his conviction and possibly a sentence of life in prison. That's what we're talking about. Opening statements, witness testimony, pictures, videos. There was a lot the jury saw so far in this trial. Here's the question, though. After week one, who's winning? Who's winning the case? Now, obviously, I have to give the caveat. It is impossible to know that exactly. It's impossible to know what the jury is thinking about. But from a legal point of view, I want to try to dig into who may be winning. And we're going to go through all of the major moments this past week. And to do that, I want to bring on former Palm Beach County State Attorney Dave Aronberg, who I love having on. First thing I'm going to ask Dave, though, is before I even get into the Diddy conversation, Dave, because you are a multifaceted, multi-talented individual, tell everybody where they can find you and all the different programs you're hosting.
Jesse, it's always good to be with you, man. I have a show on Legal AF, so that's on YouTube. It's called Legal AF. I do periodic case reviews of intersection of law and politics, and occasionally true crime. So find me there. Also, I'm the managing partner of Dave Aronberg Law. But most importantly, I'm a guest on Sidebar.
There you go. That is the most important. All right. So, Dave, I am not going to ask you yet. I'm not going to ask you right now. I'm going to save it for the end who you think won week one. We'll talk about that. And yes, I know that rhymes. That'll be my last question to you, but I want to go through this step by step. So, to be clear about something, at the time of this recording, this is before the testimony wrapped up on Friday. So just keep that in mind. But we have a great sense of the whole week in general. So let's start off. Opening statements on Monday. Now, it started with Assistant United States Attorney Emily Johnson explaining to the jury that Combs allegedly committed 20 years of crimes and that he had a team to help him. Bodyguards, chiefs of staff, assistants. These are crimes like kidnapping, arson, drugs, sex crimes. In fact, here's a quote. For years, the defendant used his inner circle and his company's resources to sexually exploit multiple women, including women he forced and manipulated into having sex with male escorts, meaning men who the defendant paid to have sex with women while he watched. No matter what, the defendant and his inner circle made sure he got everything he wanted. Many times that involved committing crimes together and then covering up those crimes. She went on to say, let me be very clear on this next point. This case is not about a celebrity's private sexual preferences. The evidence will show that the sexual conduct at issue in this case was coercive and criminal because the defendant made women have sex when they did not want to because he threatened them. He drugged, he lied, and he even used violence to make them do it. And she talked about the multiple alleged victims in this case, like Cassandra Ventura, who we're going to talk about a little bit later because she testified this week. An unidentified alleged victim known as Jane, a single mother that prosecutors said this person was coerced into freak-offs. There's also Mia, Combs' apparent former employee, who will apparently also testify that she was allegedly sexually assaulted. Hey, by the way, you know we plan to cover every aspect of this Sean Combs criminal trial for you. And one of the reasons we can do that, and one of the reasons we can keep bringing you this content is because of the incredible support that we get from our sponsors like Upside. Now, Upside is great. It is a free app that gets you cash back when you buy daily essentials. So I pump my gas, I can use Upside. I go out to lunch, I can use Upside. Get something at a convenience store, I can use Upside. And why not get cash back when I do all these things, right? This is real cash back. It's money that appears in your Upside app that you transfer right into your bank account. So once you have the free Upside app, you claim an offer for whatever you're buying on Upside. You pay as usual using a debit or credit card. You follow the steps on the app, you get paid. So to find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description to download Upside or scan the QR code on screen and make sure to use our promo code SIDEBAR because you'll get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. Hope you can check it out. So Dave, I've kind of summarized it here from the prosecution. Did they deliver in their opening statement? I know opening statements are not evidence, but man, oh man, are they important. Tell me, do you think the prosecution delivered?
Yes, I thought they were great. I thought that the prosecution did what they needed to do in the opening statement. I thought it was really important for them to distinguish between weird sexual conduct, which the jurors probably just can't even comprehend, this kind of freak-off stuff, from the actual crimes here. Because it is Diddy's defense that, hey, sex isn't illegal. Domestic violence is illegal, but he's not being charged for that here. So at worst, this is a domestic violence case. Kick it back to state court, let them deal with it, case dismissed. So I thought the prosecution did a really good job in keeping the jurors' eye on the ball.
The only thing I'll say is, and I did a previous sidebar on it, it felt to me they spent a lot of time explaining to this jury why this is a crime. And let me tell you, racketeering, sex trafficking, very complicated. I try to explain it to people about what this case is about. They can't understand it, and that's no fault to them. But when I try to explain, oh, okay, look, you're dealing with sex trafficking, so you're dealing with somebody who was allegedly harbored, transported, maintained for the purposes of commercial sex work, something of value is being exchanged, and force, fraud, or coercion were used, that's confusing. When I mentioned racketeering conspiracy, that there was a criminal agreement to further racketeering activity, a pattern of illegal activity, that there was a criminal enterprise that had a common purpose. There were all these alleged crimes they committed, Sean Combs at the top, kidnapping, arson, forced labor, sex trafficking, bribery, obstruction. That's not easy to digest. I've said it before, I'll say it again. It's not like a classic case where you have a shadowy organization that's kidnapping girls from another country, taking them to another country, and selling them off to the highest bidder. As disgusting as that is, that's not quite what we have here. Do you feel that the prosecution has a little bit of an uphill battle where they have to keep explaining why this is a crime?
Yes, and that's why they took so much time to do that in the opening, and I thought that was smart to do so. There's an old adage in politics, when you're explaining, you're losing. Not quite the same in the law, but it is true that if you have to spend all your time trying to explain complex charges, that's not ideal. You would rather just make it like, hey, we all know why this is a crime, obviously, and the stuff is horrific, but they do have the shock factor on their side. And just the images and the descriptions and the baby oil and all this stuff that comes out, the urination and all this stuff has got to be so shocking that I do think that helps the prosecution. The other thing that helps the prosecution is that their key witness, Cassie, and I know we'll get to it, is 8 months pregnant. I mean, you want a sympathetic witness? Put someone 8 months pregnant on the witness stand talking about how she was sexually assaulted. It's good for the prosecution.
Real quick, before we go to the defense's opening, are you saying that there could be a chance the jury decides this case not on the black letter law, not on meeting the elements, but because they're so angry and they're so inflamed at what they're seeing day in and day out that they want to hold Combs accountable? Because he could have sexually assaulted Cassandra Ventura. He could have beaten Cassandra Ventura. It doesn't necessarily mean it's sex trafficking or racketeering, and I'm going to get to the defense's opening statement, but I agree with you. There are really despicable things that are being alleged here, and again, we'll get to her testimony. But are you saying there's a chance the jury could be persuaded by emotion?
Absolutely. Jurors come from their own world experiences, their life experiences, and they come in here and they hear about the celebrity doing these shocking things. And yeah, they may just say, let's punish this dude. On the other hand, the defense is aware of that too, and they have the same strategy. If you can tarnish the key witness, then maybe the jurors have said, to hell with both of them. A plague on both their houses. So
as we know, jurors are not supposed to make a decision based on emotion, but you said they're human beings. It happens. So let's keep that in mind. Now let's go to the defense. So the defense opening statement was from Tenny Garagos, and she characterized the case as the following. Quote, Sean Combs is a complicated man, but this is not a complicated case. This case is about love, jealousy, infidelity, and money. This case is about voluntary adult choices made by capable adults and consensual relationships. This case is about those real-life relationships, and the government is trying to turn those relationships into a racketeering case, a prostitution case, and a sex trafficking case. It will not work. Now, Garagos emphasized that this is about Combs' private sex life, swinger parties, that yes, Combs was violent, that yes, he had a temper, but domestic violence is not sex trafficking. Dave, turn it over to you. Did the defense, did they do a proper job of at least trying to say to the jury, hey, listen, what you're about to hear, doesn't amount to the crimes that he is being charged with, and everything was consensual?
Yeah, I thought this case has been really well lawyered up to now. I really do think both sides did what they had to do. I thought the defense focused the jury on the actual charges. It's interesting how they said that it's a complicated relationship, but not a complicated case. That goes to what you were saying earlier. When you're explaining, like the prosecution was, all the details and why this is so complicated, then yeah, that's tough. That's trouble for the prosecution. The defense is saying, we've got simplicity on our side. All you have to know is there are a lot of relationships like this. They don't end up in federal court. So I do think both sides did what they needed to do, but it's the testimony that leads me, and I'm not going to say which side won the week yet, but it's the testimony that leads me to conclude which side is ahead.
Oh, I wonder which side. I wonder which side. All right, well, here's the thing. The fact that they owned up to the violence, right? They didn't explain away the 2016 tape of Combs appearing to beat up Cassandra Ventura. They said it's indefensible, although I'll get into that a little bit later because I think they almost provided a defense to it. But they said, look, he was angry, he beat her up, but these aren't state-level charges. These are very specific elements. I think this case is all going to come down to closing arguments, personally. I think it's all going to come down to closing arguments and how it's articulated. But owning up to his violence, that's a bold strategy, and I wonder if that could potentially backfire.
Yeah, they were saying that it's over jealousy, and you can see how he's grabbing at her cell phone, and it's a cell phone issue, not a human trafficking issue. It had nothing to do with the freak-off, whereas Cassie was saying it's because of the freak-off. So that's important, but the video speaks for itself. I mean, people lie, video does not. And Diddy forever had denied everything against anyone until that video came out. Then he had to come clean and say, okay, that happened, but nothing else did. Everything else is a lie, but that happened, and here's why it happened. That video is going to be etched in the jurors' minds. It is so powerful, so devastating to see her there lying on the floor after a brutal beating. I do think that emotion can get involved. Yeah. And if jurors are confused about the charges, state versus federal, they may just default back to that video and say, I don't like this guy, guilty.
Well, and we'll get into this when she testifies, but the idea being, why did you feel there was a threat on you? Well, if I didn't do what he wanted, Exhibit A, look at the 2016 tape. Okay, so now I want to move on to the first witness, Israel Flores. So this is the hotel security guard who responded to Sean Combs' assault on Cassandra Ventura in 2016, testified that Combs had this devilish stare on his face when he responded to the incident, that Combs tried to allegedly bribe him with a wad of cash saying, don't tell nobody, that he saw Cassie with a purple eye, that he filed the report, but didn't call police, recorded the security video on his cell phone to show his wife, even said at one point that he pinned Combs up to the wall after Combs allegedly grabbed another security guard's phone. I thought that he was very, very interesting there talking about it. But, under cross, they basically said, Combs never attacked you. You didn't report it to the police. Why didn't you put certain things in your report? I believe that was a part of his cross-examination. Do you think he was valuable to the prosecution?
Yes, because the more they talk about that video, the better it is for the prosecution. Although the defense scored points because they couldn't show that that incident was directly related to a dispute over the freak-off. It could just be a domestic violence incident over a cell phone. That witness really didn't help when it came to why that incident occurred. And it is Diddy's counsel's theory that it only occurred based on basic domestic violence, and this is not a domestic violence case, so you should just delete that from your mind, the whole incident. But jurors can't delete it from their mind. The more that the prosecution gets to talk about that video, the better it is for the government's case.
But didn't he help prove bribery as an underlying predicate crime for racketeering? And correct me if I'm wrong, in order to be convicted of racketeering conspiracy, the prosecution has to have the jury agree to two underlying predicate crimes, right? So whether it's kidnapping, arson, forced labor, sex trafficking, bribery, obstruction. I mean, if he's saying Combs offered him money to stay quiet, and you're saying that Combs is operating this criminal enterprise where he engages in pervasive abuse of women and uses his money and his power and his resources and his staff to cover it up, was it a bribe, was it not a bribe? I don't know.
Yeah, you need to have at least two predicate crimes, and bribery would be one of them. But you also have to show this is an ongoing criminal enterprise. And what is a criminal enterprise? The human trafficking, the pleasing him with these weird sex parties. But if it's just a domestic violence case, then the whole racketeering thing goes away, and thus the bribery thing doesn't matter here. So that's why.
Can I ask you about that? Let's say the jury goes, I don't know about the freak-offs, but I'll tell you what, I think he engaged in kidnapping. I think he engaged in arson. I think he engaged in bribery that was connected to a domestic violence incident. Does the racketeering charge, does the jury have to believe that there was a sex trafficking operation going on, or just sex trafficking in general, in order for him to be convicted of racketeering?
Got to be a criminal enterprise. Remember, these laws were created to go after the mafia. You have this whole structure where the Don and the capos are involved, and they're all on the top. And so that's why you have to show that this is like a business, a whole enterprise for the benefit of Diddy. If it's just a lover's quarrel, then there is no racketeering here, even though you have evidence of bribery, arson, and other crimes.
Is it a problem he didn't call police?
Yeah, well, yeah, because you may wonder, this is really a crime. Why didn't you call police? Plus, what's wrong with you? I mean, how can we believe you? We want to sympathize with you. You're a trustworthy individual, but you didn't think it was big enough to call police. Why? Because you wanted to show your wife for your own prurient interest so you can maybe sell it to TMZ. I mean, you can just see how you can poke holes into the credibility of this witness.
Yeah, taking a video of the surveillance in order to show your wife, jury might wonder what that's about. But look, I will say this, I said it before, I'll say it again. I thought that this was brilliant on the part of the prosecution. Before you bring Cassandra Ventura, you bring a witness to talk about the 2016 tape, corroborate her story about being attacked, allegedly sees her with these bruises. Again, I think that that is an important witness. Just as important as Daniel Phillip, the next witness who took the stand. So there were two witnesses who testified before Cassandra Ventura. I think that's really great. And I've said it before, but remember when Cassandra Ventura filed her lawsuit in 2023, she laid out a lot of allegations. It was hard to know whether or not they're real or not. What do we take away from him? As soon as that tape came out, it changed the whole game. It not only corroborated that part of her lawsuit, but it arguably corroborated everything she was saying. So to begin with the videotape, to begin with the security guard, I think that's key. And then you go to Daniel Phillip. So this male performer talks about being paid to have sex with Cassie, that Combs was directing their sexual performances, testified about rubbing baby oil, role-playing, Combs pleasuring himself while this is going on, recording them, red couches, Astroglide, lubricant, that Combs was dressed up in a bandana covering his face. It was very detailed. He also testified that he observed Cassandra Ventura on drugs, believes that he heard Combs slapping her, saw her being dragged by Combs, her allegedly saying, "I'm sorry." Combs allegedly throwing a bottle of liquor at Cassandra Ventura. Combs taking a picture of his ID for insurance. Was that a form of intimidation or not? And on cross-examination by Sean Combs' defense counsel, he was pressed about inconsistent statements to authorities about whether or not he was a stripper or dancer when he was assigned to perform for Ventura and Combs, important for transportation to engage in prostitution. That he didn't even want money during these encounters. Quoted as saying, "In my head, I was just excited. I was in this world and happy to be involved with people of such notoriety." He expressed his feelings towards Ventura. Quote, "If she ever gave me a chance to date her, I absolutely would have." And he testified that Cassandra Ventura paid him, right? So Dave, reliable witness, valuable witness, who did he benefit more, the prosecution or the defense?
I think it was a push. You're dealing with a sex worker. Yeah. You're dealing with a sex worker. So sorry to say, but sex workers don't generally have a lot of credibility with jurors. They look at this like, you get paid to have sex. And then he questions whether he really was being paid. And then because of the cross-examination. And so, boy, that would eliminate the Mann Act charges, which says you cannot transport individuals over state lines for purposes of prostitution. And then he's talking about how they had feelings for Cassie and, maybe in another world they would be together. And so that goes to the whole issue of consent. And now that is the defense's claim here. That's their main defense is consent. Because if you have consent, you don't have force, fraud, or coercion. You need force, fraud, or coercion to have human trafficking. And if there's no human trafficking, then the whole racketeering thing sort of falls apart. And so that's why I don't think this witness was great really for either side. I mean, I think the prosecution was able to score some points with him. But on the other hand, the cross-examination was powerful enough that I would call it a push.
Well, I'll tell you what, it's interesting you say that because we think there's going to be multiple alleged escorts or male performers or dancers who are going to take the stand too. So that'll be interesting. Okay. Now let's move on. Big witness of the week, Cassandra Ventura. Star witness for the prosecution, alleged victim number one. Her direct examination, meaning being questioned by the prosecution, lasted 2 days. She testified about being coerced into freak-offs, these elaborate sexual performances done for Sean Combs' pleasure that began during the first year of their relationship, these voyeuristic sexual episodes where she would perform sex acts and have sex with paid escorts in front of Combs, including when he pleasured himself. They are at the center of the racketeering and sex trafficking charges that, despite her objections to the freak-offs, sometimes, by the way, even documented in messages to Combs, she claimed she was forced to partake in them. She testified how Combs beat her up. This, too, was apparently documented in photos. There is, of course, the 2016 hotel incident. She describes horrific episodes, including her being forced to be urinated on, that she had to partake in freak-offs while having UTIs and sores in her mouth, that Combs used security and assistance to help him, including tracking her down, punishing her, that he would videotape freak-offs and leverage them against her, including one incident where he allegedly showed her on a plane these tapes, or a tape, essentially intimidating her, and then right after, allegedly pressuring her into a freak-off. She testified the freak-offs happened in all different cities, frequent, weekly, so the transportation element important for sex trafficking. She identified a bunch of escorts. She talked about the environment she was around, alleged violence, that he had guns, and she ended her direct testimony talking about how Combs allegedly raped her. Dave, how effective was her testimony for the prosecution?
Her direct testimony was extremely powerful, not only with her words, but also the fact she was 8 months pregnant. The defense knew that was trouble for them, so they asked the judge to keep her in the witness box, so to conceal her stomach from the jurors, so that when the jurors walked in, they would not see how pregnant she was. And the judge said, nope. And so she walked right by the jurors on the way to testify, and the jurors got to see her 8 months pregnant. They got to see her emotional. They got to see her ask for breaks. There were some tender moments. I mean, her voice, apparently, according to all observers, is pretty tender, and she comes across really sympathetically. Now, I do think that the prosecution probably could have done a better job taking the sting out of what would come out in cross, where you saw that some of those text messages back and forth were mutually raunchy and showed consent for at least some of the freak-offs. I think the prosecution, indirect, could have gone into that more to eliminate the surprise, because she came across so well on direct, and then I thought it was left up to the defense to tear her down, and I think, at least in part, they did.
So we're going to talk about the cross, because look, I think they tried to build that up a little bit. She did. She goes, look, I engaged in freak-offs voluntarily at the beginning. I wanted to make my partner happy, and then it escalated. Now, I think from a legal point of view, and correct me if I'm wrong, these are the ways I think she helped the individual charges. So sex trafficking, there is a charge dedicated to victim one, sex trafficking. Physical injuries, blackmail tapes, the plane incident, allegedly controlling her life, her career, her appearance, the freak-offs in multiple locations with paid escorts, the acts during freak-offs. I mean, how could someone agree or consent to urination or having to do freak-offs with UTIs and sores in your mouth? The idea of, you talk about the payment of these escorts, or an escort being used in multiple locations, transportation to engage in prostitution, and for racketeering, when she testified that there would be assistance and people who would help Sean Combs cover up the freak-off events and try to track her down. Those are the ways I think she specifically helped the prosecution at those charges. Would I be correct in thinking that way?
Oh, absolutely. She was their most important witness. She connects all the dots for all the charges. And without her, there wouldn't even be a case. I mean, it was her civil lawsuit against Diddy that was settled by Diddy within a day that led to these criminal charges. So I agree with everything you said. And the prosecution did try to take some of the sting out of what would come on cross. I just think maybe they could have done more on that.
Well, let's talk about the cross, okay? So the cross by Anna Estevao, one of Sean Combs' lawyers, confronted Ventura with text messages and emails that she sent to Combs, seemingly encouraging and wanting these freak-offs. Ventura wrote in one text from 2009, "I'm always ready to freak off, LOL. Baby, I want to FO so bad." So was it done to appease him or not? That she heated up the baby oil. She goes to buy candles, or at least said she was going to go buy candles, that she was instrumental in setting all this up. More texts expressing their love for one another. I love you so much it makes me cry. This is a text message from Combs. Love my baby. I love you so much it consumes my life. How did it happen? That's Combs writing Ventura. Ventura responding, I wondered the same thing, who I was before we decided to be together. So you're seeing this kind of loving relationship. That there was jealousy in the relationship, that she was jealous of Kim Porter, that she needed attention, that she had a burner phone when dating Kid Cudi to keep it from Combs, that Diddy suspected she had a relationship with Michael B. Jordan, that she filed a lawsuit against Sean Combs, the one that we know in November 2023 that was done to ruin his career. So you have love and jealousy fueled their relationship. You have cross-examination alleged inconsistencies in her statements, that she was the one who was doing drugs and that Combs got angry at her for taking drugs without him, that there was no drugs in the baby oil. So it kind of pushes back on the drug trafficking claims of racketeering and claims that he would drug alleged victims to keep them compliant. On cross-examination, it was also argued that maybe he wasn't controlling her life by talking about her physical appearance, but giving her legitimate feedback, that he was a fashion executive. Dave, did the defense have wins here?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I thought the defense did a really good job because you have to be very careful when you cross-examine a sexual assault survivor, especially one who is 8 months pregnant. But the woman who did it did an excellent job. She even complimented the witness, saying, "You're so beautiful." I mean, wow. I
thought that was weird. I thought that was weird a little bit. No?
Yeah, but then Cassie said thank you, and it was a really weird moment. But I think that it showed that the defense was rather, they were erring on the side of too much deference to her, being too kind, which I think is okay because this is a very touchy area. She's a sexual assault survivor. She's a domestic abuse survivor. She's 8 months pregnant. She had all the sympathy of the world from the jury. So you come in there, guns a-blazing, you're going to get bit. And yet,
was it the idea that, you're so beautiful, you're so charming, you're manipulative? You think that's where they were going?
I saw some people thought that. And perhaps I sort of think this is a way for the defense lawyers to win over the jury, because it's not just the defendant who's on trial. Really, it's the defense lawyers too, because if the jury does not like the defense lawyers, they're not going to like their client. So if they like the defense lawyers, they're a lot more likely to like their client. So I think they were just playing the game and, knowing that Cassie had a lot of sympathy amongst those jurors. So they were trying to poke holes without offending the jury's sensibilities. So I thought they were effective at it. And I think that they were able to score points in showing that not only did Cassie consent at some point to the freak-offs, but also helped organize them, buying the candles, setting it up. And I think what they did here was to tarnish Cassie enough that perhaps they could put some reasonable doubt in at least one juror's mind. All you need is one, and it's a hung jury. And that's what they're trying to do. Maybe have a juror think, oh my gosh, both these guys, they're living in this weird world. What are we doing here? There's plenty of doubt. Essentially, as I said earlier, like borrow a phrase from Shakespeare, a plague on both their houses. Now, overall, I think Cassie did extremely well, but the defense definitely did score points.
I do wonder if the defense went too far, maybe in the wrong direction at one point. So there was all this discussion about Combs being a drug addict. And remember, he kind of admitted the same thing in his 2024 Instagram apology video about the 2016 tape, saying he was, messed up. And I think this is where they were going in cross, that his withdrawal symptoms maybe made him prone to anger. And leading up to the 2016 tape, or around the 2016 tape too, which would be interesting because didn't they say in their opening statement that tape, what he did on that tape was indefensible? I wonder if they went too far there.
I agree with you. I thought the same thing. I don't know which way the drug abuse goes, because the drug abuse is not a defense to human trafficking and freak-offs and racketeering. A drug defense is maybe a mitigating factor if this was a domestic violence case, perhaps. But this is a human trafficking case. So you can be on drugs and still commit force, fraud, or coercion, and it's not a mitigating element that you were on drugs during the time. So that's why I thought it was kind of weird. Maybe they were just trying to have maybe a few of the jurors who had some of their own substance abuse issues, or family members who had their own issues, to get some sympathy for this defendant, saying, yeah, he wasn't in his right mind. But again, that doesn't negate the elements of these crimes.
I will say the judge wanted to ensure in every which way that Cassandra Ventura, a pregnant Cassandra Ventura, finished up her testimony in the first week. I mean, even the prosecution, they filed a letter with the court saying, this happened last night, that they wanted the court to jump in and to stop the cross-examination by 4:30 p.m. Friday. And again, Judge Jeroen Subramanian himself expressed frustration at the possibility of her testimony continuing to next week. The judge shot back in court yesterday. In what universe did you not understand this is what was going to happen? You're not telling me this wasn't everyone's understanding that this witness was going to be done this week? So, it's interesting to see what'll happen. Again, at the time of this recording, she hasn't wrapped up her testimony. And before I ask you the million-dollar question about whether or not who won this week, at the time of this recording, we believe Dawn Richard is expected to testify next. And this is a former member of Danity Kane, filed her own lawsuit against Sean Combs. She allegedly witnessed the alleged abuse of Cassie. What can we expect from her testimony? And do you think this is a wise witness to bring on next?
Yeah, you need corroboration. After the defense scored points against Cassie, you need corroboration to show that Cassie's story is the one to be believed and that you can have a complicated relationship. And you can even consent perhaps at one point and be into freak offs, but then you can also withdraw that consent and you can say no. And that's where the defense is going to try to cloud things up, because they're going to try to say it's either all or nothing. Once you consent, once you're into this weird relationship, you can't come back and then decide that you've changed your mind because it wasn't clear to Diddy. You have to make it absolutely clear, and it was never clear. It's complicated. Whereas this other witness may say, no, it was clear. She didn't want to do it. She expressed it. Diddy knew it, and he used violence. He used force to compel people to do what he said.
So I now ask you the million-dollar question. Who won week one of the Sean Diddy Combs criminal trial?
The prosecution won week one. They had their best witness, person who's the key to their case, and she came off really well. The defense did score points, and so it's not a knockout. If this were a boxing match, I'd say the first round goes to the prosecution, but there are many rounds to come, and because there was not a knockout, I think it's going to go up to the scorecards at the very end, and so anything could happen. So I hope you'll have me back to make a prediction on the result. I've been asked by others, who's going to win this case now? And I said, you can't tell by the first week. But right now, to use another sports metaphor, the prosecution is ahead in the clubhouse.
It's interesting, and trying to read the jurors. Elizabeth Milner, our reporter, came on yesterday and said, at one point, the jurors during cross-examination of Cassie looked kind of checked out. It's impossible to read they could be tired. They could be like, oh, I've heard this so many times. I get the point. It's impossible to know. But I think it is an interesting legal exercise to have right now after week one to try to make sense of the wins, the losses for both the prosecution and defense. Dave Aronberg, great seeing you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Jesse.
And that is all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.